Namaskar. We'll begin our proceedings. Yeah.
Om Bhadram Karne Shreyaam Devaah Bhadram Pashe Makshabhirjatraah Hirairangai Spashtvagam Sartanobhi Vashem Devahitayarayuh Om Shanti 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 Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ओम शांति शांति शांतिः
Namaskar. Good evening to everyone. A great pleasure to welcome you all to today's Vimarsh talk by Professor Arvind Sharma on Hindutva and religion. I'm also grateful to Shri S. Gurumurthy ji for moderating today's session. Just a brief introduction of the speaker today. Formerly of the Indian Administrative Service, Shri Professor Sharma is the Birks Professor of Comparative Religion in the School of Religious Studies at McGill University in Montreal. He has also taught in the United States, Australia, and India. He has published extensively in the fields of Indian religions and comparative religion. He is the general editor of the Encyclopaedia of Indian Religions, and his book on the Manusmṛti is currently under publication. He was also instrumental in the adoption of a universal declaration of human rights by the world religions at a global conference held in Montreal in 2016. Friends, Hinduism is often described as a way of life. Radhakrishnan termed Hinduism as commonwealth of religion. But what is Hindutva? The term Hindutva is extensively debated in the media, academia, and political circles. Several books have been written on the subject. Savarkar's book, Essentials of Hindutva, written in 1923, is indeed a classic. And more recently, Aravindan Nirakantan published a book on Hindutva, which is a comprehensive volume on the subject. In 1995, the Supreme Court also weighed in on the concept of Hinduism. With the rise of Hindutva, the consciousness of Hindu identity, critique of secularism, etc. in India's political circles, do we have room to discuss such issues? I think we should discuss these issues more openly and in a more transparent fashion. How can we make such discussions productive by elevating it beyond the concerns of identity politics? The concept is highly misunderstood and often leads to controversy. In the Western media, for example, the term is used in a pejorative sense. The questions often raised are, what is Hindutva? What is the relationship with Hinduism? How did the term originate? What is its history? Does it have a broad meaning? Or is it a narrowly defined term? Is it a religious ideology? Is it a political ideology? These are genuine questions. Professor Sharma, who is a leading scholar of comparative religion, is eminently placed to provide some answers to clarify the Hindutva concept. Given the topicality of this subject, the VIF is happy to organize a series of lectures and roundtables by him in the coming weeks and months on the Hindutva theme. I now request Shri Gurumurthy ji to kindly moderate today's session. He needs no introduction. An eminent thinker, journalist, and chartered accountant by profession. He is the chairman of the board of trustees of the Vivekananda International Foundation. Thank you very much for coming, and I request now Gurumurthy ji to take over. Would you like to first make some introductory remarks? Well, so I request now.
Well, I'd like to speak.
Okay, yeah, please. Yeah. It's working. It's working.
Can you hear me? You can. Okay, sorry. My mistake. Okay, namaste.
Actually, nothing is provided. I thought
So,
it was
friends,
the information.
I would like to begin by thanking Sri Guru Murthy for providing me with this opportunity for sharing my thoughts with a wider audience, and the Vivekananda International Foundation for hosting these lectures. I would also like to thank Sri Arvind Gupta for the generous introduction. Can you hear me now? Good. Perhaps I should also say, as I begin to deliver this lecture, a few words about myself and what I intend to discuss. For those who may not know, my name is Arvind Sharma. I have been teaching in the School of Religious Studies at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, for over 35 years now. But I remain an Indian citizen and keenly interested in what is happening in India. My purpose in delivering these lectures, titled Hinduism for Our Times, is to follow up on an exercise I undertook almost 3 decades ago when I delivered a series of lectures on Hinduism for our times, which were also subsequently published as a book. It is perhaps a sign of our times that the present series of lectures deals with Hindutva as distinguished from Hinduism. What then do I mean when I say that I want to speak for Hindutva for our times? We as Indians have inherited the ideology identified as Hindutva by its spokespersons, such as V.D. Savarkar and many others. But times change, new occasions, as the poet says, teach new duties. Just as some years ago, I speculated on what new forms Hinduism as a religious tradition might be encouraged to assume in the light of new developments, I will now try to speculate the directions Hindutva ideology might take in the light of the developments in our own times. Developments which traditions face sometimes by being innovative. And if that is not enough, by being inventive. And if that is not enough, by being creative. I will offer my suggestions on this subject in a series of 5 lectures, of which this is the first. I will also like to clarify the title of this first lecture, Hindutva and Religion. By the word religion, I mean here the use of the word religion in the Indian Constitution. And so, a more elaborate title of the lecture would read, Hindutva and the Concept of Religion in the Indian Constitution. When I mentioned earlier that I teach in Canada, I did so with something in mind. It is a Canadian communication theorist, Marshall McLuhan, to whom we owe the famous statement, the medium is the message. The medium through which I am addressing you now is English. Scholars such as Sheldon Pollock and others have referred to the scorched earth phenomenon which follows the introduction of English into a culture. What they mean by this is that the introduction of English tends to destroy pre-existing languages in a culture or region. The Kenyan author Ngugi wa Thiong'o makes the point in his book, Decolonizing the Mind, that every language, I quote him now, has a dual character. It is both a means of communication and a carrier of culture. End of it. This means that the loss of a language is not merely a linguistic, but also a cultural event, and requires that we take the monolingualism associated with English seriously, because it can have a devastating impact on other languages and cultures. The Nigerian author Chinua Achebe laments that, I quote him now, the first thing they stole from us was our language. End of quote. The diplomat Pawan Verma, in his book titled Becoming Indian, alludes to a conversation he had with Wangari Maathai, in which the Nobel laureate, I quote Pawan Verma now, once told him that it was only the colonial rulers who truly understood the importance of language. This is why it was the first thing they took away from us. Tragically, the victims are the last to know what they have lost. End of quote. This contrasts sharply with the way Indian languages function. Sanskrit and other Indian languages have coexisted throughout history. We may refer here to the account of the marriage of Shiva and Parvati, narrated by Kalidas in the Kumar Sambhavam. The epic depicts a scene in which Shiva and Parvati are congratulated by the various gods and goddesses after their marriage. One of them is goddess Saraswati, who congratulates them both in Sanskrit and Prakrit. Rajshekhar, in the 9th century, in the available portions of his famous work, Kavya Mimamsa, describes a cultured person as one who is proficient in both Sanskrit and Prakrit. Earlier, the Kam Sutra refers to intellectual gatherings and recommends that at such gatherings, neither Sanskrit nor Prakrit should be used exclusively. As the text says, Natyantam Sanskrite Neva, Natyantam Deshabhashya. Am I making too much of the fact that this lecture is being delivered in English? After all, it could be argued, even persuasively, that English is now an Indian language. Our constitution is in English. The laws which govern us now were first formulated in English by no less a person than Lord Macaulay himself. Even more to the point, as Professor Norwin Hine of Yale University pointed out several decades ago, English serves as the main language of inter-regional and inter-sectarian communication among the Hindus themselves. The historian K.M. Panikkar pointed out within a decade of our independence that almost all the major texts of modern Hinduism were originally composed in English from 1800 onwards. If memory serves, he cites only two exceptions. The commentary on the Bhagavad Gita by Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak, which originally appeared in Marathi, and Satyarth Prakash of Swami Dayanand Saraswati, the founder of the Arya Samaj, which was composed in Hindi. Even the foundational text of Hindutva, to the best of my knowledge, was composed in English by V.D. Savarkar. One could even argue, from a philological point of view, that English is, after all, also an Indo-European language, like Sanskrit, Hindi, Bengali, Kashmiri, Marathi, and so on. So why this squeamishness about the use of English? How then do I justify making a major intellectual point out of the fact that I'm addressing you in English? I begin my defense with an observation made by Professor Abhay Kumar Dubey of Ambedkar University in his work in Hindi entitled अंग्रेजी का अलौकिक साम्राज्य उपनिवेशवाद की भाषाई विचारधारा, The Celestial Empire of English, the linguistic ideology of colonialism. Therein, he makes the point that we need to distinguish between the nature of India's encounter with the two colonialisms, which J. Sai Deepak has characterized as Middle Eastern colonialism and European colonialism. The former involving India's encounter with Islam, and the latter, India's encounter with the West. He goes on to point out that while the main instrument of colonization in the case of Middle Eastern colonialism was religion, the main instrument of colonization by Europe, in this case Britain, was language. Reminding one of Ram Manohar Lohiya's succinct remark, quoted in a footnote by Sri L. K. Advani in his autobiography, that the British ruled over India through Banduk ki Goli and Angrezi ki Boli. Hard power, soft power, Shastra, Shastra. The audience may have sensed the direction which I am moving the argument here. I am arguing that the Hindutva of our time needs to pay more attention to the continuing linguistic domination of English in India. There is a tendency in the literature on Hindu nationalism to regard the British oppression of India as mild compared to that to which it was subjected during Muslim rule. But if we recognize that the main instrument of the more recent colonial domination by the British was not religion, but rather language, then we may have to revisit this tendency, especially if we discover, as I hope to demonstrate, that the dominant use of English has grave implications for the religious and political reality of it. Let me make my initial point from this perspective with an observation which pertains to V. D. Savarkar's seminal work on Hindutva, published around 1923. And so we are celebrating its centennial today. Titled Hindutva, Who is a Hindu? One way of viewing his entire exercise would be to propose that the introduction of the English word religion from 1871 onwards in the various censuses, with its unarticulated assumption that one could only belong to one religion at a time, was having the effect of fragmenting the composite dharmic tradition into the four religions, quote unquote, of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. One may then suggest that it was in order to counter such fragmentation of this tradition, brought about by the introduction of the word religion by the British, that V. D. Savarkar drew upon a distinction found in English discourse, between religion and culture, a distinction virtually unknown within the Indic tradition. He developed the concept of Hindutva as a culture which was shared by all the four religions of Indian origin as a means to retrieve the unity of these traditions, which was being lost through the use of the word. He's trying to retrieve the unity of these traditions through the use of the word culture, a unity which was being fragmented by the use of the word religion. Allow me now to extend the theater of our reflection from India to Asia as a whole. Is it a mere coincidence that virtually all the major cultural areas of Asia had to coin a new word to translate the European word religion into their own languages? The Japanese came up with the word shukyo, the Chinese with the word zhongzha, the Koreans with the word zhongyo. But what about India? India created not a new word, but a new meaning. Instead of creating a new word, it imparted to the word dharma the narrower Western meaning of the word religion, which might help explain the following anecdote. It is related of an Indian Christian convert who attended the church on Sunday and the Kali temple on Friday, that when the missionary gentleman asked him whether he was not a Christian, he replied, "Yes, I am. But does it mean that I have changed my religion?" One savors the humor of the anecdote more fully when one visualizes him as saying, "Does it mean that I have given up my dharma?" The use of the Indian word dharma to translate the English word religion has had the effect of narrowing the meaning of the word dharma itself and of potentially robbing the Indian religious tradition, as I will argue in my last lecture, of what might be its unique contribution to the religious life of humanity. We see this tendency to narrow the meaning of the word dharma in the use of the word dharma-nirapeksha to translate the word secularism. That is to say, the state should not be concerned with dharma-nirapeksha. The word dharma, in the Indic acceptation of the word, is derived from a root which means to uphold, to sustain. Dharma is that special quality which makes a thing what it is. It is that which upholds an individual, a society, a polity, the cosmos. Are we then to understand this newfangled word, dharma-nirapeksha, as suggesting that we should be indifferent, nirapeksh, to upholding individual integrity, social harmony, political cohesion, and so on? Fortunately, some other words have also since been used to translate the word secularism, such as sampradaya nirapeksh or panth nirapeksh, which suggests that the discomfort one feels with the use of the word dharma in this context may also have been felt by others. Excuse me. But how could this happen? How could that generation of Indians which used the word dharma-nirapeksha to render the word secularism be so oblivious of this obvious problem? Thereby hangs a tale, that of a lion. Sudha Pathak, I beg your pardon, Shubha Pathak, who teaches in the Department of Philosophy and Religion at American University in Washington, D.C., uses two words which may help explain how this might have happened. These two words are metaphor and amnesia. Taking our cue from her, we can say that when the first generation of Indians learned English and used the English word religion to describe Hinduism, this generation was aware that the word was being used as a metaphor. What do I mean by saying that the word religion was being used as a metaphor? What I mean is this. When we describe somebody as a lion, to celebrate his or her bravery, we are conscious of using the expression as a metaphor. That is to say, the only attribute of the lion we intend to convey is its bravery, and not the lion's other attributes. We do not wish to convey the other attributes the lion possesses, such as 4 legs, claws, or a mane. Normally, such discourse does not carry this danger with it, that the person reading the description of somebody as a lion might begin to imagine that this person also has 4 feet, claws, and a mane. If, however, in an Alzheimer moment, one suffered from amnesia and forgot that the description is metaphorical, one would start imagining that the person being described as a lion also possessed the physical attributes of a lion. It could be a demented moment. It would be a demented moment, but one can see how amnesia could cause it. When the first generation of Indians used the word English to describe Hinduism, they used it in the sense that just as most people in England follow Christianity and most people in the Middle East follow Islam, similarly, most people in India could be described as followers of the Hindu religious tradition. Hinduism functioned in the life of the people of India comparable to the way Christianity might be said to function in Britain or Islam in the Middle East. However, they were also aware that, like the lion, these religions, Christianity and Islam, also possessed certain other characteristics which did not apply to Hinduism. Now, what could be these characteristics? Abrahamic religions in general, and Christianity and Islam in particular, possess the following 4 features. They are conclusive, they are exclusive, they are separative, and they are competitive. They are conclusive, they are exclusive, they are separative, and they are competitive. I shall now argue that these descriptions do not apply to Hindus. Now, what do I mean by that? Judaism, Christianity, and Islam regard themselves as God's final revelation to humanity. This is how the Jews looked upon Judaism, Christians upon Christianity, and Muslims upon Islam. This is what makes them conclusive. The followers of these religions, with the possible exception of Judaism, also believe that only they will be saved and not others. This is what makes them exclusive. Moreover, conversion to them involves a dual process. One has to reject one's previous religious affiliation in order to accept theirs. That is to say, in order to become a Christian, a Jew would have to both abandon Judaism and accept Christianity. This is what makes them separate. That is to say, in order to follow them, one has to separate oneself from one's previous spiritual allegiance or allegiances. They are also competitive in the sense that they compete with each other as a means of salvation. And the principles of one religion pose a challenge to those of the other. The British philosopher David Hume, for instance, laid down the principle that in matters religion, I quote him now, whatever is different is contrary. Whatever is different is contrary, and that it is impossible that the religions of ancient Rome, of Turkey, of Siam, and of China should all of them be established on any solid foundation. End of quote. For this meant that a miracle which validated any one religion at the same time, according to Hume, had the effect of invalidating the other religions. Professor John Hick extends this line of argument to point out that, I quote him now, for any particular religion, there will always be more reasons for believing it to be false than for believing it to be true. End of quote. Why? Let's see. If we line up the religions of the world as Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Confucianism, Taoism, Shinto, and the tribal religions, then we have 11 such religions. Now, there are 10 reasons for believing that any one is false, and only one for believing that it is true. Hinduism is not competitive. Hinduism is not conclusive. It believes in continual revelation. Hinduism is not exclusive. Non-Hindus will also be saved. Hinduism is not separative. You don't have to cease being a Christian, for instance, to be a Hindu. Hinduism is also not competitive, because according to it, each religion confirms the validity of the other, just as each human being confirms the humanity of the other. Professor S. Radhakrishnan explains the point well. I quote him now. If the Hindu chants the Vedas on the banks of the Ganges, if the Chinese meditates on the analects, if the Japanese worships the image of Buddha, if the European is convinced of Christ's mediatorship, if the Arab reads the Quran in his mosque, and if the African bows down to a fetish, each one of them has exactly the same reason for his particular confidence. Each form of faith appeals in precisely the same way to the inner certitude and devotion of the followers. End of quote. When the first generation of English speakers in India used the word religion, they were aware that when they described Hinduism as the religion of India, they were not associating such features with it. This became less true of the second generation of English-speaking Hindus, to the extent that as a result of their English education, they were now less grounded in the Hindu tradition. By the third generation, unless one was a Hindu of a deep dye, which prevented one from falling into this error, most English-speaking Hindus would start forgetting that when the word religion is applied to Hinduism, it does not mean that Hinduism is also conclusive, exclusive, separative, and competitive. This is the generation which began to suffer from amnesia and forgot the metaphorical nature of the use of the word religion in relation to Hinduism. They started taking it literally, just as someone might start believing that because a brave person has been called a lion, the person has 4 feet, claws, and a mane. Perhaps such amnesia can explain why the Indian Constitution is concerned with the ideas of majority and minority. Ideas which were rarely formulated in this way, or are even within the Indic civilization. There is a reason for this. The Western concept of religion implies exclusive religious identity. It is when we regard religion as involving an exclusive religious identity that we can speak of a society in which there is a majority which follows one religion and a minority which follows another religion. Or if exclusiveness is not associated with religious identity, one could then follow more than one religion at a time. This would render dual or multiple religious identity a possibility. If a society's members could identify themselves as followers of more than one religion, then the concepts of majority and minority no longer seem to work. For instance, we can say that in the United Kingdom, Christians constitute a majority and Muslims a minority because Christians and Muslims, both the religions, so both followers of both the religions, possess exclusive religious identity. That is to say, Christians cannot be Muslims and Muslims cannot be Christians at the same time. But if one could also be the other, the complexion of the case changes radically. That this is not a mere theoretical possibility can be seen by comparing the religious reality of India to that of Nepal, which lay outside the scope of the British census operation, which relied on an exclusive religious identity. In the year 2004, Princeton University Press published an English translation of a book on Hinduism by the German scholar Axel Michaels under the title Hinduism, Past and Present. Therein, Axel Michaels reports, I quote him now, a Nepali asked if he was a Hindu or a Buddhist answered, yes. All these answers may be imagined with a typical Indian gesture, the head slightly bent and softly tilted, the eyelids shut and the mouth smiling. End of. Apparently, this experience made quite an impression on the German scholar because he alludes to it again at the end of the following passage. I quote him again. Therefore, the views that there is only one God and all gods are one are not so far from one another in the Hindu religions as is often being held. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image can also lead to the conclusion, thou shalt not make only a single graven image. Hence, there is not one single word for God in Sanskrit, but many. Ish, Ishwar, ruler, Bhagavat, elevated, Prabhu, mighty, Deva, God, among others. The poet Saint Kabir uses 86 terms for God. The consequences of this notion of God are tangible in popular religiosity all over. To use an example I have already cited, if a Newar in Nepal is asked if he is a Hindu or a Buddhist, he might simply answer yes. To restrict oneself to one position, one God, would be a stingy perspective of divinity for him. He can worship both Buddha and Shiva without getting into a conflict of belief. End of quote. Just across the border from Nepal and India, such a lot is sometimes made about the distinction between Hinduism and Buddhism, a line which is not drawn across the border. Striking evidence in support of multiple religious identity as a pre-modern feature of life not only in India, but in China and Japan as well, is provided by history. During the Ming period, from the 14th to the 17th century of Chinese history, one hears of Sanjiao, Chinese word which means three teachings. The term refers to the teachings of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. My Chinese colleague, a fellow student of comparative religion, warned me while I was at school that this should not be taken to mean that some Chinese followed Buddhism, others followed Confucianism, and yet others followed Taoism. A cultivated Chinese was familiar with all the three teachings and followed them according to his leanings at various stages of his life. One could be a Confucian scholar during one's active life and then retire to a Taoist or Buddhist monastery at the end of one's life. It might be argued that this evidence is interesting, but at best anecdotal and at worst folklore. Therefore, allow me to provide scientific statistical evidence in support of this point. I share with you the results of the religious census of Japan in 1985. According to this census, 92 million in Japan declared themselves as Buddhists, 115 million as followers of Shinto, 1 million as Christians, 14 million as followers of new religions, and the total responses came to 223 million. The total population of Japan in 1985 was 121 million. Thus, the returns for religion exceeded the total population of Japan. This means that many Japanese identified themselves as followers of more than one religion. 95% of the population identified themselves as followers of Shinto, and 76% of the same population also identified themselves as followers of Buddhism. Who now constitutes the majority and who the minority? The whole discourse of majority and minority, a major feature of our constitution, is challenged by such examples. The problems caused by the understanding of religion as representing an exclusive identity do not stop here. They have a crucial bearing on the concept of religious freedom entertained by a country or a culture. The meaning of religious freedom turns, in good measure, on our understanding of the meaning of the word religion itself. If religion involves exclusive identity, then freedom of religion would mean freedom to convert others. This becomes clear from the articulation of the right in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. According to this article, I quote it now, everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes the freedom to change his religion or belief. The word retained is not mentioned. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Excuse me. This right includes the freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom alone or in community with others, in private or public, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. End of quote. In Article 18, the right to freedom of religion is defined as including the right of a person to change his or her religion, and also as the right to change the religion of others through teaching, practice, worship, and observance. This is confirmed by the Lausanne Covenant, a religious manifesto adopted in 1974, which promotes Christian evangelism. It specifically invokes Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as conferring on Christians the right to convert others to Christianity. In order to comprehend the full significance of this point, allow me to briefly review the concept of religious freedom in the light of the religions of the world. The religions of the world can be broadly classified into two groups, depending on whether they proselytize or not. Proselytization means that a religion seeks converts as part of its very definition of religion. It should be clearly recognized that by merely accepting converts, a religion does not become a proselytizing religion. It has to actively seek converts. From this perspective, the following religions of the world are proselytizing religions: Christianity and Islam. The following religions, at least in their mainline version, are non-proselytizing. Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Confucianism, Taoism, Shinto, and the tribal religions. One should add that Buddhism is a missionary religion, but not a proselytizing one, in the sense that it does not require its followers to give up their previous allegiance to other religions. In the case of Judaism, there is some evidence that it was a missionary religion in the early years of the Christian era, but it has not been one for a long time. In the case of the proselytizing religion, religious freedom thus means the freedom to seek converts and to proselytize. Religious freedom means freedom for conversion. In the case of the non-proselytizing religion, religious freedom would be the freedom not to be made an object of proselytization. Freedom from conversion. The Indian Constitution has been blind to this distinction, presumably as a result of working with the Western concept of religion, which is pervaded by the proselytizing side. The time has now come to bring matters to a close. I would like to conclude this lecture by asking, does it make sense that we as Indians should be altering our religious and cultural reality merely in order to conform to the semantic conventions of a European word such as religion, just because our constitution was drafted in English? Should we be paying the price for the linguistic laziness, or dare I say, the intellectual laziness of earlier generations? Should not the votaries of Hindutva do something about this? Thank you. I thank you for the privilege of your time and attention.
Dr. Arvind Gupta, who introduced the speaker as well as the subject. I never thought that the subject would be so profound at the beginning, and at the end I feel that my illiteracy is so much to be covered by understanding more and perhaps reading more of what Sharma has written. Of course, I have read him, but the way he has put it today, the volumes which a library may not be able to accommodate, he has been able to explain half an hour in a language in which anybody can perhaps understand. And how, as a nation, because of what he calls as linguistic laziness, our past has become uncertain. For a nation, the future will all be, for anybody, the future will be uncertain. But this has created uncertainty about our past. It has raised huge questions about who we are, what we stand for, what our forefathers are. What's the purpose of this nation? What is the idea of the collective civilizational journey we have had for the last 5,000 years? All this has become a matter of question. Of course, we are dealing with a domestic subject in a foreign language. And English language has been a growing language. They say in 1600 or so, it had only some 50 or 60,000 words. Today, it has almost close to 1.2 billion words, they say. 1.2 million words. But still, how did we fail the tallest people, intellectuals, political leaders fail to address this elementary distinction between what is dharma and what is religion, which an ordinary Indian was always able to understand. In fact, I still remember when I went to hotelier had invited me to his house. In his puja room, I saw all kinds of pictures, all gods. I also found one Jesus. Jesus did not mean anything different to that family because they said, my daughter-in-law likes Jesus, so we have kept Jesus also. It just doesn't limit, reduce, or abridge Hinduism. It actually adds to it. But keeping any other god along with Christ or cross in a Christian family would destroy that family's claim to be true Christians. You see, this we have allowed as the definition of religion. Instead of making that religion understand that you are in a different country, you have a different purpose, and this country has the purpose of delivering this message to the world that you can reach God by any means, and you may not even believe in God if you believe in ethics. Belief in God is not fundamental to a person's development. This is the extent to which the Hindu thinkers have gone. But to pack the whole thing to mere belief and to the belief that if you believe in some other belief, this belief is a wrong belief. And the example of the lion is so apt. And to define a very noble human being in terms of characteristics of religion, how wrong it is, that much damage has been done to the concept of Hindu Dharma by comparing it with Abrahamic religions. I will try and explain what is the political consequence. The political consequence has been disastrous. It's not just a mere intellectual exercise that this is Dharma, this is religion, and we accept everything. We don't even need to accept God. These are all the society's experience gained over millennia. That is why Encyclopaedia Britannica, and they have removed it now, I don't know why. That definition was quoted precisely in the terms in which you explained Hinduism. That the core of the religion does not even depend on the existence of God or whether there is one God or many, and that was quoted by the Supreme Court to say a Hindu undivided family having a Christian daughter-in-law and a Christian son will still be a Hindu undivided family. This was the judgment that the Supreme Court gave in 1976, based on which the Hindutva judgment was given in 1995. It is all following a particular definition of what is Dharma. Dharma is different from religion, is the basis of understanding that the society is dharmic. But you reduce the whole society to that dharmic concept into religious concept and create not only majority-minority distinction but also two nations out of it. This shows that this idea of religion was not merely confined to what they say as religion. It has a huge political program behind it. And it has been practiced for 2 millennia with bloody consequences. Professor R.J. Ramal says 1.2 billion people have been killed in the last 2,500 years, 1/3 of which is attributable to communism, which is only a byproduct of Abrahamism. This bloodshed was not there in this country till the 13th century. How is it that a society which had, if the number of gods were counted at one point in time, that exceeded the number of human beings in it, 33 crore gods, and our population was far less. With this many gods, we didn't have any quarrel. We managed all the gods. He got them married to one another. There is no dispute between gods. But with the two little gods, see the kind of bloodshed that has happened in the world. So this is so palpable. This doesn't require any great intellectual exercise to say that a religion doesn't mean what is, even in their own terms. The idea of religion, even if it is a faith, it need not be an exclusive faith. It need not be a separatist faith. It need not be therefore a violent faith. The idea is all these four qualities also promote violence. War, bloodshed, terrorism. So it doesn't limit itself only to a relationship between man and God. And it is a collective faith. We never had a collective faith. We had a collective exhibition of the culture of faith. We will pull a temple chariot. That doesn't mean everybody who pulls the chariot worships that God. Pulling the chariot is a cultural festival of the city, town, village. In fact, in my village, I tell you, having come from a village, I can understand our dharma much better than anybody who was, because our knowledge still belongs to maybe the first generation. In our village, there used to be a border Kali temple. We all worship God at home. We all worship God in our neighborhood locality. That God more or less matches with our understanding of what God is, vegetarian, and we are what we eat only that God will eat. So we worship that God because it is our locality God. But when we go to the border Kali temple, she doesn't represent only you. She represents the whole village. So at 5 o'clock in the evening, we will go and offer Nariyal and all that and worship that goddess. At night, 8 o'clock, she will demand chicken, she will demand booze. The same God, the same deity. We know that God whom you worship with Nariyal is going to demand much more things. But that did not make us any different in our reverence towards him. Can you believe this kind of syncretic approach being compared to faiths which say, yes, we have come to rule the world and this is our God. Unless you accept it, you have a war with us. This is what Swami Vivekananda said. Whether your God is superior or my God is superior, let us have a boxing match and decide. These religions, as religions, being equated to what is dharma, it is not merely a lack of intellectual understanding or amnesia. It is actually bringing down the civilization. An attitude to life, that which will only save the world actually. If there is any hope for the world, it is only this approach that you have got to live with all kinds of differences. You are limiting the differences to color, you are limiting the differences to race, you are limiting the differences to ethnicity, but you are not accepting the differences to God. Just as there are people with so many colors, there are so many gods, you have to accept them. No, God is only one. And that God has an address and a telephone number and an email. You cannot have package the whole world into a model which is inappropriate outside your civilization. This is thing. 2 or 3 studies have in a way understood this, but they can't go farther than that. One is the fundamentalism project of Chicago University. Chicago University brought out the books. American Institute of Sociology and
Manusmṛti.
It contained scholars from all parts of the world, including D.P. Madan and our people also. In the first volume itself, they mentioned that the word fundamentalism is a peculiar feature or a special feature of the Abrahamic faiths, which are religion of the book. And they are not applicable to Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Taoism, and Shintoism. And Shintoism. Because here There is a revealed religion with a God as himself has said that this book contains everything. And anyone stepping out of it should be dealt with. That is not the approach in the Eastern religions, and so they are not fundamentalist. But fundamentalism is a word used for everybody. It is based on the idea that Hinduism is also, even though your own study, it's a 5-volume study and probably the only study on religious fundamentalism. It is not that these things are not known. You can't correct this because it involves ballot papers. It involves rights which have been conferred on wrong premises. So it's a much more difficult subject. And how in India, what we are discussing today as Hindutva or Hinduism, how it was discussed in 1948-49, when Jawaharlal Nehru said he saw both these Hindus and Buddhists, Muslims as only community. He said Hinduism is Muslims are more aggressive, but Hinduism is more dangerous. Tall people whom the nation looked up to, and the man commanded the respect of not only India but the whole world. He saw these two different paradigmic forces as just communities, and he blamed one community as more dangerous. This set the tone for what is minority, what is majority, and this majority is a dangerous majority, and you lead away the minority. This became the national discourse. This has nothing to do with what is the true position of what is Hindu. And slowly, actually, the Supreme Court modified its position. As I said in 1976, they first came to the conclusion we cannot reduce the idea of Hindu only to religion. They were the first one. Politically, it has not been accepted even today. It is the Supreme Court. Then the Supreme Court said in 1995 that Hindu or Hinduism or Hindutva denote the national ethos, culture, and way of life. It cannot be reduced to a mere religion. The Supreme Court has been far more advanced in understanding the true position of what a religion means and how different is the idea of Hindu or Hindu Dharma. And the Supreme Court till 2016, 2019 also, it refused to review this decision because it is not reviewable. You cannot review a philosophy. So one point I want to submit for Professor Sharma's consideration is, he said ideology. I think we never had an ideology. We always had a philosophy. Ours are darshanas. 3 or 4 darshanas are nirishwar. They didn't even say there is a God. They spoke more of the self, the Atman. So we never said this is the way. We said this also a way. This also a way. This also a way. So we are inclusive because we are basically philosophic. Ideology is I am right, you are wrong. This itself flowed from the religion. All the ideologies which grew out of the Abrahamic regions always believe they are right, others are wrong. It may be the idea of nation, or it may be the idea of how to frame economics, whether it is capitalism or globalization or communism. We are right, you are wrong. This ideological approach emanated out of the exclusive religious approach. And we are not like that. We have been in a far more free, loose, liberal surrounding, and we are illiberal. The most liberal way of life is seen as the most illiberal set of people because of the same process. you collectively see how different we are and how we live so differently and without any problem. But the capacity of the Hindu civilization to accommodate so many people, integrate them, assimilate them, live with them, is a lesson in liberalism. But the entire plate is turned against us. They are liberal and you are illiberal, because again we are playing hockey match with cricket rules. There is no basis for following the approach, the rules, the history, the way of life, the organization, the them versus us approach. So my feeling is that it is true that the truth has been buried. But how to come out of this situation? It's not merely a question of Vivekananda International Foundation conducting 4 lectures. But this has also to happen the way by which it has been distorted, neutered has also to take place in the same way. Because I have been part of this process. Many of us, Balbir Puji is here, all of us, or Surya Prakash is here. We have been part of the process of fighting this on the ground. But for the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, we will not be discussing Hindutva. It is Ram Janmabhoomi movement that took the word Hindutva in the political field and challenged the opposition parties. Come on, you declare this as communal. They went to the court and said that the Hindutva appeal is communal, it is narrow, it is exclusive, it is separatist. The Supreme Court said no. Because the Supreme Court has ultimately to look into the text and the philosophy, all that Mr. Sharma explained. Of course, not in such a profound and clear way, but in substance, whatever Dr. Sharma said was the basis on which the Supreme Court came to the conclusion you cannot reduce Hinduism or Hindutva to pure religion. Of course, there is a religious, what you call, of course, still the word religion is a very confusing word. There is an element of religion or faith. You can at best call it a faith. But it includes a very vast dimension of life, which is culture, which is way of life, which is the ethos of India, which is the very identity of India. Do you mean to say this would have come up if we are discussing Hindutva in the context of Abrahamic faith? No, it had to be fought on the ground. Even to retrieve the truth today, you have to work on the ground. And you have to face all abuses. We have all taken so much abuses in life. Because without taking abuses, you cannot talk. So I am extremely happy that this audience had a feast of the seeds of intellectualism that Dr. Sharma placed before you. And has more lectures to follow. And we will finally bring it out as a book later. There will also be interactions which we will incorporate and bring it out for a larger audience to look at it. But we must understand that this English-speaking group is primarily responsible for the distortions that have come into our polity, our constitution, our discourse. And a part of the media is also responsible for purveying it in a very large way. So I'm happy that Dr. Arvind Sharma agreed to our request. Of course, he was very keen to do a lecture. I only suggested to him that Vivekananda International Foundation may be the right forum for you to do the lecture, and he very kindly consented. And I'm happy that he could place it in perspective, which not very easy, a complex subject. And now I will leave it to the forum for interaction.
So you can take some questions. Yeah. Floor is now open for any questions, comments, but keep it brief because a lot of people would like to ask. First time I find that such a profound. I think people are still soaking in. Yeah, please.